Senhoras e senhores, muito bom dia. Temos a honra e o prazer de receber hoje aqui na Faculdade de Direito o Prêmio Nobel da Paz de 2022, Oleksandra MATVIICHUK. Gostaria de cumprimentar os presentes e a nossa vice-diretora, a professora Anelisa Bechara, deve se juntar a nós em seguida. So that is a pleasure and an honor for us and the University of São Paulo Law School to welcome you here today, Oleksandra MATVIICHUK. And it is very important to hear from you some hints about the world that is coming. This certainly raises many questions and many perplexities due to aggressions against international law, the sovereignty and the freedom of countries, like Ukraine has been suffering and resisting bravely, and also what has been going on in the Gaza and in the West Bank as well. So these are clear aggressions against international law, and we have to be aware of what is going on and to have this opportunity of listening to your considerations is a very welcome and important contribution. So you have the floor. Thank you.
Yeah. Bom dia. Thank you very much for providing me a floor. It's a huge honor for me to address to this distinguished audience. I'm a human rights lawyer, which means that I'm applying the law to defend people and human dignity for many years. But now I found myself in a situation when the law doesn't work. Russian troops are deliberately shelling residential buildings, schools, churches, museums, and hospitals. They're attacking evacuation corridors. They're torturing people in infiltration camps. They forcibly taking Ukrainian children to Russia. They ban Ukrainian language and culture. They're abducting, robbing, raping, and killing civilians in the occupied territories. And entire UN system of peace and security can't stop this. While this war turns people into the numbers, we are returning people their names. This is what we human rights lawyers are literally doing, because people are not numbers, and life of each person matters. Let me share with you one story in our database. And let me tell you that we have in our database 89,000 such stories. This is a story of 10-year-old boy Ilya from Mariupol. When Russians tried to siege the city, they didn't allow International Committee of Red Cross to open Green Corridor and to evacuate civilians. Hence, Ilya and his mother, like other people in the city, had to hide in the basement of their building from Russian shellings. They melted snow to have water, and they made fires to cook at least some food. But when supplies ran out, they were forced to go out, and suddenly they appeared in the center of Russian shelling. Ilya's mother was hit in her head, and the boy's legs were torn. With the last strength, his mother, apartment. It was no medical assistance because prior to this, Russians deliberately destroyed maternity hospital and entire medical infrastructure in the city. So in this friend apartment, they just lay down on a couch and hugged each other. They were lying like this for several hours. And this 10-year-old boy told to my colleague how his mother died and got frozen right in his arms. As a human rights lawyer, I have a question. How we people who live in 21st century will defend a human beings, their life, their freedom, and their human dignity? Can we rely on the law, or does just brutal force matter? The answer to this question is important not just for people in Ukraine, in Iran, in Syria, in Sudan, Myanmar, Venezuela, or Nicaragua. The answer to this question will define our common future, because we are losing freedom in the world. Last year, the half of population in the world went to election, but don't be an illusion. 80% of people in the globe live in non-free or partially free societies. This means that people who have a real right to vote for whom they want to vote, who have a right to say what they want to say, who have the possibility to love whatever their heart tells them to love, and freely choose whom God they want to pray, these people are minority. And the problem is not just in the fact that in authoritarian countries, the space for freedom is shrinking to the size of the prison cell. The problem is, even in stable democracies, people start to put into question the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And there are reasons for this. Because current generations in democracies, they inherited their freedom from their grandparents. They have never fought for it. They became consumers of democracy. They start to take freedom and human rights for granted. They consider freedom as a possibility to make a choice between different cheeses in supermarket. And that's why they start to exchange their freedom for something else, for populist claims, for economic benefits, for illusion of security, and first and foremost, for their own comfort. But the truth is that freedom is very fragile. We can't attain our freedom once and forever. We make our own choice every day. So let me share with you several lessons learned from my own experience. First, we live in very turbulent time. I don't know how historians in future will call this historical period, but the world order, which is based on UN Charter and international law, is collapsing before our eyes. This system was created after the Second World War to prevent wars and mass violence, but now it's just stalling. It's reproducing ritualistic movements. The work of Security Council is paralyzed. And now it's easy to predict that such fires like wars will emerge more and more often in different parts of the globe, because this international wiring is faulty and sparks are everywhere. Let me share with you how I started this morning in beautiful São Paulo. I start this morning with checking news, what happened in my native city, Kiev, because this night Russia sent 600 drones to attack city and other Ukrainian cities. And being in Kiev, we are constantly being bombarded not just by Russian drones, but also by Iranian drones. North Korea sent to Russia more than 1 million artillery shells and start to send their troops to Russia. All these regimes, they have something in common. They have the same idea what a human being is. They see people as an object to be controlled, and they deny them in their rights and freedoms. Democracies, even not being ideal, but still see people, their rights and freedoms to be the highest value. And there is no way to negotiate it, because the very existence of free world always provides a threat to dictators that they will lose their power. Second, This is not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And it's very visible when we start to speak how this war was started. Because it started not in February 2022, but in February 2014. It started in very important historical moment for people in Ukraine, because 3 months prior to this, millions of Ukrainians stood up their voice against pro-Russian, corrupt, and authoritarian government. Millions of people peacefully demonstrated just for a chance to build a country where the rights of everybody are protected, government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. And when we got our chance, an authoritarian regime collapsed and pro-Russian president escaped to Russia, in order to stop us on this way, Russia invaded. Putin occupied Crimea and part of the eastern regions of Ukraine in 2014. And 3 years ago, Putin extended this war to the large-scale invasion. It's very important to emphasize that in 2014, Ukraine was a neutral country. Neutrality was ingrained in our constitution. And Putin started this war not because he was afraid of NATO. Putin started this war because he was afraid of ideas of freedom, which came closer to Russian borders. And with this war, Putin attempts to convince the entire world that freedom, human rights, rule of law, and democracy are fake values because they couldn't protect anyone during the war. Putin attempts to convince that country with a strong military potential and nuclear weapon can break the UN Charter, can dictate its rules to entire international community, and even forcibly changed internationally recognized borders. And if Putin succeeds, it will encourage other authoritarian leaders in different parts of the globe to do the same. Third, unpunished evil grows. All this hell, which we now face in Ukraine, is a result of total impunity, which Russia enjoyed for decades. Russian troops committed horrible crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in other countries of the world. They have never been punished. They believe they can do whatever they want. We must break the circle of impunity. We must demonstrate justice. And in order to do it, we united our efforts with dozens of organizations from different regions. We built a national network of local documentators. We covered the whole country, including the occupied territories. And we have an ambitious goal to document every criminal episode which was committed in the smallest village in my country. And that is why, working together, we jointly documented more than 89,000 episodes of war crimes. And we document something more than just violations of Geneva and Hague Conventions. We are documenting human pain, because Russia uses war crimes as the methods of warfare. Russia attempts to break people resistance in the country by the tool which I call the immense pain of civilian population. So let me illustrate it with one story. This is a story of 62-year-old civilian Oleksandra. He was killed in first days of full-scale invasion near his house. He was unarmed. He was civilian. This tragedy received a huge media coverage only because it was a first court trial after the full-scale invasion started, and this Russian soldier was arrested and he was physically present in the court. So the court was full with international media and representatives of international organizations. I heard his wife, Katerina, in the court. his wife shared to the judge that her husband was an ordinary farmer, but he was her whole universe. And she told to the judge that now I lost everything. This is a meaning of justice. When we use enormous efforts to reveal what happened, to collect evidence, to identify perpetrators, to provide a chance for justice for ordinary farmer. We are doing this for people regardless who they are, what their social position, what types of crime they endured, and whether or not media or international organizations are interested in their case, because life of each person matters. And that is why this is the most documented war in the human history. The problem is that our legal system, national and international, are not developed fast. We faced with accountability gap. And one of the dimensions of this accountability gap is that there is no international court which can prosecute Putin and top political leadership and high military command of the Russian state for the crime of aggression. But all atrocities which we are documenting, it's a result of their leadership decision to plan, to initiate, and to start this war. So they have to be responsible for the crime against peace. And when we look to the history, in the whole history of humankind, we have only one such a precedent when leaders of one state were responsible for the crime against peace, which is ridiculous because if we want to prevent wars in the future, we have to punish the states and the leaders who start such wars in the present. It sounds like a common sense, but all tribunals, which you probably heard, like Yugoslavia tribunals, Rwanda tribunal, special court in Sierra Leone, I will simplify it a little bit, but it were courts where people were tried because they killed each other not according to the norm of international humanitarian law. So in the whole history of humankind, we have only one such a precedent when leaders were tried for the crime of aggression, and it was Nuremberg trial. And what it was victorious trial. It was trial where Nazi war criminals were tried only after Nazi regime had collapsed. And past century, it was essential step to establish law and justice. But it also said, like a norma, that justice is privileged to winners. That first you have to win the war and then your people have a chance for justice. But we are living in a new century. A lot of things changes after the Second World War. We have our historical task to make justice independent on the fact when and how the war will end. If someone commits international crimes, this someone has to be prosecuted. And that is why we must establish a special tribunal on aggression now to fill this gap, which we have, and to get Putin and his surrounding accountable. And I'm very glad to announce that a month ago, the historical decision was taken by Council of Europe to establish such a special tribunal on aggression. Because unfortunately, even International Criminal Court has no such jurisdiction in situation of Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. They can't prosecute Putin and his surrounding for the crime of aggression. So we will have the special tribunal instead. And this special tribunal will be open to join to any country in the world. And I hope that sooner or later, Brazil will also join. Fourth, we need peace, not occupation. People in Ukraine want peace much more than anyone else. But peace doesn't come when country which was invaded stop fighting. That's not peace, that's occupation. And occupation It's horrible. Occupation is the same war, but just in another form. Occupation doesn't decrease human suffering. Occupation just makes human suffering invisible. And Russian occupation is not just changing one state flag to another. Russian occupation means enforced disappearances, torture, rape, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. I know what I'm talking about because I'm documenting war crimes for 11 years. Millions of people who live under Russian occupation for current moment, they live in gray zone. They have no tools how to defend their rights, their freedom, their property, their lives, their children, their beloved ones. Let me tell you one story. This is a story of children's writer Volodymyr Vakulenko. He wrote beautiful stories for Ukrainian children, and entire generation of Ukrainian children brought up on his Deities book. But during Russian occupation, he disappeared. His family hoped to the last that he's alive, but like dozens of thousands Ukrainian civilians in Russian captivity. But when Ukrainian army liberated Kharkiv region, we found mass graves in the forest near the city Izum. Mass graves with dead bodies of men, women, and children there, with horrible signs of torture, and some corpse has the hands tied under their back. In the unmarked grave under the number 319, we found dead body of this children writer, Volodymyr Vakulenko. I know his family. It was difficult for them to accept the result of identification. You can ask me why Russians killed children writer. The answer is simple. Because they could. Because this is what occupation is about. And Putin openly says there is no Ukrainian nation, there is no Ukrainian language, there is no Ukrainian culture. And that is why Ukrainians have to be either re-educated as Russians or killed. For 11 years, we are documenting how these words converted in horrible practice in occupied territories, where Russians are physically exterminate active local people there, mayors, journalists, children writers, musicians, teachers, priests, environmentalists, any active people of community. How they destroyed and robbed Ukrainian cultural heritage. How they burned Ukrainian books. How they colonized these territories because they settled hundreds of thousands of Russians from different regions of Russia to live there. And when they take Ukrainian children, and we speak about dozens of thousands Ukrainian children being taken, and send it to Russia, they put them in Russian education camps. They told them, they are not Ukrainian, they are Russian children, their parents, their families refused from them, and they will be adopted by Russian families who will bring them up as Russians. So let me be clear, what is not visible for international community, but visible for every individual in Ukraine. If Ukrainians stop resisting to Russian aggression and will be occupied, Ukrainians will cease to exist. We are lawyers, and I pretty well know the UN Convention Against Genocide. It was a compromise between different states. And it's very difficult to prove this crime in the international court, but let's think from the common sense. There is no necessity to be a lawyer to understand it. If you want implement your genocidal intent, and partially or completely, to destroy some national group. There is no necessity to kill all representatives. You can just forcibly change their identity, and entire national group, sooner or later, will disappear. And last, what I want to talk today before we will start the exchange of views. Ordinary people can change the history. I know from my own experience, when you can't rely on the legal instruments, you can still rely on people. We get used to thinking through the categories of states and interstates organizations, but ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Ordinary people can change the history. Let me illustrate it with one story. I interviewed a professor on philosophy and famous Ukrainian scientist Igor Kozlovsky. He spent 700 days in Russian captivity. He was born and lived in Donetsk. Before this, I interviewed hundreds of people, men and women, and they told me how they were beaten, raped, smashed into wooden boxes, their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled, they were electrically shocked through their genitalia. One young girl told me how she was forced to write with her own blood. Another woman told me how her eye was dragged out with a spoon. So it was very little thing which can surprise me after these stories. But Igor Kozlovsky mentioned a detail which was non-important for evidence base, but this detail struck me. He described how he was kept in solitary confinement. It was a small cell in a basement without windows. It means that it was no fresh air, no light, it was poorly ventilated, and it was difficult for him to breathe. Sewage flows on the dirty floor, and from the opening of the sewage, the rats were crawling down. And this well-known scientist told me how he gave lectures on philosophy to these rats because he wanted to hear a sound of human voice. Legally, Igor Kozlovsky was a victim. He was illegally abducted and detained in unhuman conditions. He was tortured so severely that he had to teach how to walk again. But he told me that despite all of this, nothing in his experience provided him a reason to treat himself as a victim. He told me that foundation of our existence is dignity, not victimhood, and dignity is an action. Dignity means that you have not just to feel responsible for everything which is going on, but to do the right thing to change it. Dignity provides us a power to continue our fight even in unbearable conditions. And look into Ukraine and what we are experiencing for current moment. I would never wish anyone go through such experience because war horrible. War is the most horrible thing which just can happen in a human life. But these dramatic times provide us an opportunity to express the best in us, to be courageous, to fight for freedom, to make a difficult but right choices, to take burden of responsibility, and to help each other. Because only when we help in each other, in that acute moment, we are aware what does it mean to be human. And I remember that 3 years ago, when Russia launched the full-scale invasion, not just Putin, but all international partners were confident that Ukraine has no potential to resist to such enormous opposing power, because Russia has veto in UN, nuclear power, strong military potential, oil and gas, which means a lot of money, 140 million population. 3 years ago, Russia was the 11th economy in the world. And I was in Kiev when Russian troops tried to circle my city. I refused to evacuate, and with a part of my team, we continue our work on the ground. And I remembered how international organizations evacuated their personnel, even international humanitarian organizations. They left us alone. But ordinary people remained. And ordinary people started to do extraordinary things. It were ordinary people who took people out from the ruined cities. It were ordinary people who helped to survive under artillery's fire. It were ordinary people who broke through the encirclement to provide humanitarian aid, and suddenly it became obvious that ordinary people fighting for their freedom and human dignity are stronger than even the second army in the world. And I'm here to say that despite everything, the story of Ukraine, it's a life-affirming story, because these dramatic times raise hope. Because when freedom is denied, it became powerfully break out through the every concrete individuals. And I'm here to say that our future is not just unclear, but also not pre-written. This means that we still have a chance to fight for justice. We still have a chance to fight for future, which we want for us and for our own children. And I'm here to say that we still have a hope. And we have to define the hope in a proper way. Because hope, it's not a confidence that everything will be fine. Hope, it's a deep understanding that all our efforts have a huge meaning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oleksandra MATVIICHUK, for your lecture. And I would like to invite if Consul George Rybka would like to make a comment. And also we have the presence of Consul General of Lithuania and the Consul from Belgium, and also Mary Helders and Consul Rybka, would you like to? Please. Just use the microphone so that we can keep the record of your comments.
Sure.
Não vou usar o inglês, então acredito que podemos usar o ucraniano. Não, brincadeira. Pois eu transmito a ela. Gostaria muitíssimo de agradecer à Universidade de São Paulo. Gostaria muitíssimo de agradecer ao professor Paulo Cassella, ao Felipe Alamino, por esse momento, por esse evento, por essa organização. E não posso deixar de agradecer ao Marcelo Porciucola, porque realmente nos proporcionou, nos organizou também e fez todos os esforços, não poupou esforços para que nossa Oleksandra tivesse uma programação aqui no Brasil. Muitíssimo obrigado. Muitíssimo obrigado. E aos demais organizadores que, porventura, eu não tenha mencionado, né, como a diretora, da escola e tudo mais. A Ucrânia vive num momento muito complicado, Oleksandra nos expôs. Quando ela diz children, né, sobre as crianças, o que nós temos aqui são 19 mil crianças que foram raptadas. Não é uma, duas, 10, centenas, milhares, que já seria um número assustador. Mas 19 mil crianças raptadas. E essa semana passada, parece que está correndo na Rússia um catálogo de vendas, um Shopee na Rússia por crianças. Eles têm lá no catálogo, você escolhe e pode adotar. São crianças ucranianas que não só pelo rapto já é uma tragédia, mas a lavagem cerebral, como Oleksandra disse, a mudança da identidade, de quem ela é, dizer que ela foi rejeitada pelos pais e a grande nação russa está dando novamente a cidadania a ela, está acolhendo ela. São coisas assim horríveis, horríveis que aconteceram e estão acontecendo. Com relação à paz, foi me feita uma pergunta hoje, com relação à paz, o que nós imaginamos. Nós queremos a paz desde o início. Nós nem quisemos e não fizemos nada para sermos invadidos. Só que a paz, o diálogo, só existe se duas pessoas, pelo menos duas partes, tiverem a vontade de se encontrar e falar. Nós, desde o início, estamos abertos e fizemos a nossa parte e faremos. A Ucrânia fará isso. Só que não vemos nenhuma vontade do agressor. A ponto de que, isso eu mencionei na data da independência, e acho importante voltar a isso. Qual é a mensagem de Putin? Não são nas palavras dele, mas sim no ato, no Alasca, 2 horas antes, quando desceu Lavrov. O ministro de Relações Exteriores da Rússia, quando desce no Alasca, ele desce com uma camiseta CCSR, União das Repúblicas Socialistas Soviéticas. É isto, esta é a mensagem. Eles não falam, eles simplesmente te mostram os caminhos. E é isso que eles querem. Só que uma União Soviética delirante que vá até o Atlântico, desta vez. Por isso que a Europa está conosco. Por isso que aproveito para agradecer a presença de todos os cônsules dos Países Baixos, da Bélgica, Suécia, Lituânia, tão próxima e tão conhecedora destes problemas. Também que teve, infelizmente, a participação, foi obrigada, né, como nós, a participarmos do que chamava-se União Soviética. Mas a Oleksandra diz que ela tem a fé, e sim, nós também, todos temos, a fé de que isso está por terminar. Mas de que maneira? Somente com o apoio e estrangulamento, apoio de todos, estrangulamento dessa vontade, dessa filosofia, desse idealismo, não sei nem como chamar isso, russo. Putin não está para o diálogo. Tanto é que ele já disse que ele não acha que ainda será o momento para conversas. Quando será? Então, é muito difícil. E vou tomar a liberdade, professor, que é uma homenagem singela, que a representação ucraniano-brasileira, eu sou o primeiro vice-presidente dela, que congrega quase 1 milhão de ucranianos e descendentes no Brasil. E essa representação central o ano passado na presidência de Vitório Sorotchuk, que, por sinal, esteve com Zelensky anteontem, na Ucrânia, nós tivemos com ele, presidente, nós tivemos a comemoração dos 40 anos da representação central. E eu, muito honrado, talvez um pouco mais velho na época, participei da fundação desta entidade. Então, professor, por todo o apoio que tem dado às causas ucranianas, nós lhe oferecemos uma simbólica homenagem de amigo da comunidade ucraniana. A representação central ucraniano-brasileira, entidade superior representativa da comunidade ucraniana brasileira, por ocasião das comemorações dos seus 40 anos de existência, vem conferir ao Dr. Paulo Borba Cassella o diploma de amigo da comunidade ucraniana e agradecer o seu destacado apoio às nossas atividades sociais, culturais e à solidariedade para com a Ucrânia. Esse diploma é do começo do ano, de março, mas eu tinha certeza que nós teríamos uma oportunidade para entregar em mãos. Por isso que eu não fiz isso em particular, quis fazer aqui na presença de demais apoiadores da cultura ucraniana. Eu gostaria, se puderem, por favor, tirar uma foto, que eu gostaria depois. E gostaria também de chamar o doutor Felipe Alamino, que também é um grande defensor da causa ucraniana, das minorias que são perseguidas, que tem uma obra maravilhosa com relação aos tártaros da Ucrânia. Por favor. Também, não vou ler, mas é exatamente a mesma homenagem, o mesmo reconhecimento. Muitíssimo obrigado. Por favor. Muito obrigado. E não vou me alongar mais. Não vou me alongar mais. Agradeço muitíssimo essa oportunidade. Mas só que não tem como sair daqui sem falar uma frase. Slava Ukraini. Heroiam Slava.
Mais uma vez, agradecemos once again. Thank you so much, Oleksandra MATVIICHUK, and I hope we keep in touch and carry on this work. It is at least a shame that the Memorandum of Budapest of 1994, whereby Ukraine agreed to relinquish its atomic weapons arsenal to Russian Federation. And as a counterpart to that, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia promised to maintain the territorial integrity, the sovereignty, and the freedom of Ukraine. This agreement has been simply ignored. And since February 2022, Russia has invaded and keeps bombing Ukrainian civilians, infrastructure, and population. And this is a shame, not only for the governments of these countries, but for all humanity. And especially, it is a challenge in a law school. How can you lecture on international law to the students when you have evidence to the contrary of what is written and has been agreed upon. So your example and the force and the determination you showed us today be a sign of inspiration so that we carry on this effort. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for this opportunity today. The session is closed.